This video is about supply side policies and it's for macroeconomics. It's focused on the different types, what the government intends with such policies, and evaluative consideration. So to start with, what are supply side policies? Well, they are policies designed by the government to create supply side improvements. So whether this is done directly or indirectly, but it's aiming to increase long run growth. And what they do is they target the improvement in quantity and quality of factors of production. So as such policies are focused on the productive potential, we can draw diagrams of successful supply side policies via a PPF. So if we shift the PPF outwards to show an increase in productive capacity, or what we can do is shift long run aggregate supply rightwards, and again highlighting the increased national output in the long run. Now, considering the type of supply side policies, we can consider influential economists who had certain ideologies. So such economists as Keynes, Samuelson, Sen, Stiglitz are known to be or have considered the direct role of the government to improve long-run growth. So they believed that it was sometimes the government's role to stimulate private sector investment, but by public sector investment first. And without investment in the public infrastructure, education, healthcare, then it might deter such private sector investment. And the government can play a vital role in securing the spine of the economy to obviously support that trend rate of growth. So, what are interventionist supply side policies? These are policies which are direct, so the government are actively injecting expenditure to improve factors of production. So UK examples include the HS1 and the controversial HS2 routes. So the government is directly investing in rail infrastructure to support geographic mobility. Or there is the National Productivity Fund, which was announced in 2016, and that aims investment at research and development, housing, digital communication, and again, transport. There is the Contract for Difference, which is focusing investment on low carbon electricity generation, and that was established in 2014 and aims to support green capital. However, there are other ways to promote supply side improvements, and this is more aligned with the views of economists such as Friedman, Hayek, Mundell, Laffer, and they are free market supply side policies. So these aim to incentivise the private sector in improving long-run growth. Such policies include deregulation, tax reductions, privatisation, and removing barriers to productivity, and all that could support boosting the productive potential. So, examples, it could include the patent box, which enables relief on corporation tax for applying for intellectual property. Also, just think about the privatisation of the Royal Mail between the years of 2013 and 15, so believing the profit incentive would boost productivity. We can think about the financial markets and how they've experienced deregulation from Thatcher to Gordon Brown, trying to enable it to be world competing, especially allowing London the opportunity to compete with New York. So let me provide a list of more generic examples of the different interventionist and free market supply side policies. So as we can see in the list, we can see the type of expenditure the government can make based on interventionist. So if you think about subsidies, these are directly aimed at fueling supply side improvements. So at the moment there's a lot of green subsidies all over the Western world, and they're being used for two agendas, so sustainability but also energy stock. Rachel Reeves in the 2024 October budget that's just been, she's announced major capital spend on crumbling schools to support with educating the working generation of tomorrow. And of course the need to improve the hospital stock with waiting times still too high. All of which are to improve the quality and quantity of future labour and current labour, but via improved capital stock. However, it can also be just kind of like simply educational reform and injecting money into, for example, STEM subjects or computer science to improve the skill level of, again, the generation of tomorrow. Or maybe skills boot camps for the current generation. Now, free market, we can see how it aims to focus on the private sector making the supply side improvements, so on behalf of the government. So, a prime example, if you think about Ireland, when they reduced their corporation tax rate to 12.5%, it acted like an accelerator for FDI. So some countries are fully focused on developing their economy via encouraging skilled migrants and exploring how it can increase population but to fill skill shortages, such as making visas easier to apply for and removing red tape. But the incentives are for the private sector in the free market to carry out those supply side improvements. So remember, if it's interventionist, the government is directly improving the supply side of the economy. If it's free market, the government is incentivising the private sector to do it on their behalf. Now, when exploring supply side policies, avoid being too generic. Often that'll just simply limit good analysis and it'll keep it reasonable. So examples, if you focus on types of supply side policies, let's think of the example that we did earlier with Ireland and the reduction of corporation tax. Now, if you want to reach good analysis, you need to think about how that will impact both the demand side and the supply side of the economy. Because yes, it will improve the supply side because it will improve capital stock, but it will also improve the demand side. Now, investments will be encouraged because firms can retain more profits, which should boost aggregate demand. But because of that investment in capital stock, it'll also shift long-run aggregate supply. Now, the example that I've just given here about the Chancellor choosing a budget to rebuild Britain, because the government is injecting the money and it's an interventionist supply-side policy, then there should also be an AD shift to the right because the government is spending, ceteris paribus. But then also the effects of that will also be long-run growth as well. So this is more precise than simply shifting long-run aggregate supply to the right and neglecting AD. Of course, it depends on what the question is asking, but it could support analysis by looking at short-run and long-run growth. Also, if you focus on, for example, interventionist policies such as transport, then really consider the impacts it will have on the natural rate of unemployment, with greater job acceptances as the labour force are now willing to commute due to obviously that speedier travel. Now again, this could be another diagram that we could draw, and we could draw the AJ shifting to the right, which then would reduce the natural rate of unemployment. If you focus on diluting trade union power, then consider how that might lower wage expectations with less bargaining power, meaning actually the short-run flips curve may shift to the left, and with more workers now willing to accept the market wage rate, it could also lower voluntary unemployment, reducing the natural rate of unemployment and shifting the long-run flips curve to the left. So again, when you're looking at supply-side policies, just kind of think about which diagrams are the most appropriate, which ones can you apply best to, and it might not just simply be a long-run aggregate supply shift to the right or a PPF shift outwards. Right, so these are the specifics you need to concentrate on if aiming for good application and good analysis. Now, theoretically, supply-side policies aim at achieving all macroeconomic objectives in the long run. So they can increase the productive capacity, which reduces inflationary pressure. There can be more derived demand due to higher national output. And all in all, this can support our international competitiveness and see an income supporting all of the population in some way or another. However, there is evaluative insight required as well, and they're not all rosy. There's definitely negatives, there's issues. Sometimes supply-side policies can be very controversial, and as this is a common theme for a 25 marker, it's important to be able to highlight what the issues are as well. So firstly, how do we choose what type of supply-side policy to focus on? We see the current government in October 2024 is more interventionist than perhaps the last. So the October 2024 budget has seen debate over whether it will crowd out the private sector or crowd it in. Many argue that the spending will equate to higher interest rates on borrowing, reducing the incentive for the private sector to invest, which then obviously can impact both short-run and long-run growth, whilst others point to the lack of investment since the financial crisis and how perhaps this could instill greater confidence in the foundations of the economy for investment in the future. So I suppose time will tell. Also, often there is very generic evaluation. Example, just time lags, it takes time to see the effects, which is true for all, but as I said before, it's too generic. The more contextual you are, the greater the depth you can offer. So if you think about the HS2, massive overspend, so much that they've had to cancel certain routes. Major backlash from wildlife organisations due to the impact of construction on the environment. Lots of delays, even criticism saying that before it even started, the high-speed element wasn't good enough to justify the expenditure, and it was no better than high-speed rail networks that was created 50, 60, 70 years ago in other countries. So remember, whatever the government spends, for it to really support long-run growth, the investment must be effective, or it could create a high opportunity cost and an expense to the taxpayer. Also, if we consider the free market, do we always want less government intervention? Could this result in market failure, like we saw with the financial crisis in 2008? Giving too much freedom, it can be exploited and moral hazard can occur. So especially in such industries with systematic and systemic risk. So when you're evaluating supply-side policies, don't just jump into the generic examples that we see where it takes time for effect, it's a time lag. think about the specific supply side policies that you've been exploring and the potential issues with those specific ones. And again, that'll lead to good evaluation rather than just reasonable. And it'll also support with evaluation throughout and not just at the end.